The great hall of the Galactic Assembly stretched for miles in every direction, filled with beings from across the known universe. Some floated in gravity bubbles. Others breathed through machines that pumped alien atmospheres into their lungs. And a few existed as pure energy, flickering like distant stars. The Assembly had catalogued over 4,000 sentient species. And today, they were adding one more to their records. Captain Lisa Dunn stood at the center of the hall, with her small crew behind her. She was a tall woman with gray streaks in her dark hair and steady brown eyes that had seen more than most people could imagine. Her ship, the Horizon, had been the first human vessel to make contact with alien life. And now she carried the weight of her entire species on her shoulders. The Valari. Ambassador floated down from his elevated platform. His body was made of living crystal, constantly shifting through colors that humans had no names for. His name was Thuvex, and he had been handling first contact situations for over 3,000 years. "You are the humans," Thuvex said. His voice sounded like wind chimes in a storm. "We have observed your planet for some time. You have achieved basic space travel. Congratulations." Lisa kept her face calm, but she felt the sting of his words. Basic space travel. Her people had worked for centuries to reach the stars, and to this ancient being, it was nothing special. "Thank you for receiving us," Lisa replied. "We come in peace, seeking to learn and to share what knowledge we have." A sound rippled through the assembly. It took Lisa a moment to realize it was laughter. Beings of every shape and size were laughing at her words. Thuvex tilted his crystalline head. "Share knowledge? What could your species possibly offer? You have no psionic abilities. Your bodies are fragile and require constant maintenance. You sleep for a third of your short lives. Your young are helpless for years after birth." He paused, consulting something invisible in the air before him. "You have been classified as Category 3, average intelligence, standard physiology, no remarkable traits." Sam Ortega, Lisa's first officer, stepped forward. He was a stocky man, with kind eyes and a quick temper. "Now wait just a minute. We crossed 300 light years to get here. That has to count for something." "Many species have achieved interstellar travel," Thuvex replied without interest. "The Morith did so before your planet had cooled. The Valari mapped this galaxy while your ancestors were single-celled organisms. You are not special. You are simply people." Lisa put a hand on Sam's arm to calm him. She had expected this. Everything she had read about the Assembly suggested they looked down on younger species. But she also knew that arguing would get them nowhere. "We understand," she said. "We ask only for a place among you. A chance to prove ourselves." The Assembly voted quickly. Humanity was granted 12 star systems on the outer edge of civilized space. The systems were barren, filled with dead rocks and frozen moons. No other species wanted them. It was, Lisa realized, the galactic equivalent of being told to go play in the corner while the adults talked. As the human delegation prepared to leave, an ancient being approached them. It was a Morith, one of the oldest species in the galaxy. The Moroth existed as living shadows, their forms constantly shifting and flowing like dark water. This one was called Kelvoth, and he was older than most stars. "Word of advice," Kelvoth said, his voice like whispers in an empty room. "I have watched many young species join this assembly. Most fade away within a few centuries. Some grow and thrive. The difference is never what others expect." Lisa studied the shadow being. And what is the difference? The ones who survive are not the strongest or the smartest. They are the ones who refuse to accept what the universe tells them they are. Kelvoth's form rippled with something that might have been amusement. "I voted to abstain on your classification. I have learned not to judge the river by the stillness of its surface." "What does that mean?" Sam asked. But Kelvoth was already fading away, dissolving into the ambient darkness of the hall. The journey back to human space took 3 months. Lisa spent most of it staring out at the stars, thinking about what had happened. Her crew tried to remain optimistic, but she could see the disappointment in their eyes. They had dreamed of joining a great galactic community as equals. Instead, they had been dismissed as unremarkable. When they finally reached the 12 systems that now belonged to humanity, Lisa called a meeting of her senior staff. "I know this isn't what we hoped for," she said. They looked at us and saw nothing worth noticing. They gave us the worst territory they had because they expected us to fail. "So what do we do?" asked Dr. Maria Santos, the ship's chief scientist. She was a small woman with fierce intelligence burning in her eyes. Lisa smiled. It was not a gentle smile. "We prove them wrong. We take these dead systems and we make them live. We build. We grow. We learn, and when they finally look at us again, they will see something they never expected." "And what's that?" Sam asked, themselves looking back. The work began immediately. Human colony ships arrived by the dozens, then by the hundreds. Engineers who had spent their lives dreaming of terraforming distant worlds finally had their chance. Scientists studied the alien technologies they had glimpsed at the assembly and began to understand them and improve them. It was not easy. The first colony on Kepler 7b failed when the atmospheric processors broke down. 40,000 people died before rescue ships could arrive. Another colony was destroyed by an asteroid impact that the early warning systems failed to detect. 12,000 more lost, but humanity did not stop. They learned from each failure. They improved their technology. They adapted their methods. And slowly, impossibly, the dead systems began to come alive. 50 years after first contact, all 12 systems had been terraformed. Green worlds orbited stable suns, filled with cities and farms and forests that had been grown from nothing. The assembly noticed, but they were not impressed. Humans were industrious, they admitted. Like insects building a hive 100 years after first contact, human scientists developed new methods of faster-than-light travel. Their ships could now cross the galaxy in weeks instead of months. The assembly noticed again. They upgraded humanity's classification to Category 2, still unremarkable, but perhaps worth watching. 200 years after first contact, humanity had become the largest trading partner for 17 different species. Human goods were everywhere. Human ships flew every trade route, and human diplomats sat in councils across the galaxy. The assembly could no longer ignore them, but they still believed, deep in their ancient hearts, that humans were just people. Fragile, short-lived, without any power worth fearing. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The Keth came from the darkness beyond mapped space. From regions so far from any star that light itself seemed afraid to travel there. They had been waiting for millions of years, growing stronger, building their fleets, and preparing for the moment when they would return to claim what they believed was theirs. Everything. They were insectoid creatures. Standing 8 feet tall on 6 powerful legs, their exoskeletons were harder than the armor on most starships, and their claws could tear through metal like paper. They did not negotiate. They did not take prisoners. They consumed entire civilizations and moved on to the next, leaving nothing but empty worlds behind them. The first warning came when a Morith observation post went silent, then a Valari trading station, then an entire system belonging to the peaceful Valthari people. By the time the Galactic Assembly understood what was happening, the Keth had already conquered 3 systems and killed over 1 billion beings. Valthar Prime was a beautiful world. The Valthari who lived there were gentle creatures, standing no taller than human children, with soft blue fur and large trusting eyes. They had no military because they had never needed one. Their entire culture was built on art, music, and the belief that all beings could live in harmony. When the Keth fleet appeared in their sky, the Valthari did not understand what was happening. They tried to communicate, to welcome these strange visitors, to share their music and their kindness. The Keth responded by burning their cities to ash. The Galactic Assembly held an emergency session. Ambassadors from 100 species argued about what to do. Some wanted to send a peacekeeping force. Others wanted to negotiate with the Keth. A few suggested that the Assembly should simply retreat to safer space and wait for the Keth to grow tired of conquest. While they debated, billions died. Danny Reeves knew nothing about galactic politics. He was 63 years old, with a gray beard and hands that had been scarred by decades of hard work. He captained a small cargo ship called the Betty May. named after his late wife, and he spent his days hauling medical supplies along quiet trade routes. It was not an exciting life, but it was honest work. His daughter Megan served as his pilot. She was 31, with her mother's red hair and her father's stubborn streak. She could fly anything with an engine and had once landed the Betty May on a moving asteroid during a solar storm. Just to win a bet, their security officer was Hector Salinas, a retired Marine who had served in 3 different border conflicts before deciding he preferred the quiet life. He was 55, with a body that had been rebuilt with synthetic parts after a combat injury, and eyes that never stopped scanning for threats. The 3 of them were in orbit around Valthor Prime when the Keth invaded. They had just finished delivering a shipment of vaccines to a children's hospital in the capital city. They were preparing to leave when the first explosions lit up the atmosphere below. "What in God's name is that?" Danny muttered, staring at the sensors. Megan pulled up the data. Her face went pale. 10,000 ships. Maybe more. "They're not broadcasting any identification codes." Hector was already moving toward the cargo bay. "Those are Keth. I've seen intelligence reports. We need to leave, now." Danny did not move. He was watching the planet below, watching the fires spread across the peaceful cities, watching the small ships trying desperately to flee the surface, only to be shot down by Keth fighters. "There are children down there," he said quietly. "In that hospital we just visited. Remember the little ones? With the blue fur? They sang us a song, Danny." Hector's voice was firm. "We have no weapons. We have no armor. If we go down there, we die. Then we die." Danny's voice was calm, but his eyes burned with something that Hector had seen before, long ago, in the eyes of soldiers who had decided that some things were worth dying for. "But we don't leave those children to burn." Megan was already plotting a course back to the surface. She did not question her father's decision. She had grown up hearing stories about her grandmother, who had hidden refugee families in her basement. During a war on Earth, she had grown up learning that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else was more important than fear. The Betty May descended through a sky filled with fire. Keth fighters screamed past them, focused on the fleeing Valkyrie vessels and ignoring the small cargo ship. Danny guided them toward the hospital, where a crowd of Valkyrie had gathered on the landing pad. Their large eyes turned upward in desperate hope. They landed hard. Hector was already at the cargo ramp, his old military rifle in his hands. "Get them aboard," he shouted, fast. The Valkyrie rushed up the ramp, parents carrying children, elderly being supported by the young, medical workers helping the injured. Danny counted them as they boarded. 200. 300. The ship was designed to carry 50 passengers at most. "We're out of room," Megan called from the cockpit, "and we make room." Danny started pulling cargo crates out of the hold, dumping medical supplies onto the landing pad to create more space. Every crate he removed meant another family could board. The Keth ground forces arrived when they had 400 Valkyrie aboard. Danny saw them coming, a wave of dark shapes moving through the burning streets, their claws gleaming in the feralicht. Hector stepped off the ramp and knelt in a firing position. His first shot took down a Keth warrior at 300 meters. His second and third followed immediately after. The Keth were not used to resistance. They paused, confused by this strange creature that was attacking them with such primitive weapons. That pause saved lives. More Valkyrie rushed aboard while Hector held the line. He fired with mechanical precision, each shot finding its target. When the Keth finally organized a charge, he had already killed 47 of them. They reached him before he could reload. He threw his empty rifle at the first one and pulled out a metal pipe from the wreckage nearby. He killed 3 more with that pipe before they brought him down. Danny saw it happen. He saw his friend fall beneath the Keth claws, and he felt something break inside him, something that had been holding back a rage he did not know he possessed. "Megan," he said into the communicator, his voice steady despite the tears running down his face. "Get us out of here." The Betty May lifted off as the Keth swarmed the landing pad. They fired at the rising ship, but Megan was already pushing the engines beyond their limits, climbing through the smoke and fire toward the stars above. The Keth warships tried to intercept them. Megan flew like she had never flown before, weaving between plasma beams and kinetic strikes, finding gaps in the enemy formation that should not have existed. When the sensors burned out, she flew by instinct alone, feeling the ship around her like an extension of her own body. Danny talked her through it. He did not know how he stayed calm. Perhaps it was shock. Perhaps it was the knowledge that 400 innocent lives depended on him. He watched the hull breach warnings flash across his console and ignored them. He felt the ship shudder as pieces tore away and kept his voice steady. They reached the edge of the system. They jumped to hyperspace. They escaped. The story of the Betty may spread across the galaxy within days. 3 humans. 1 unarmed cargo ship. 400 Valkyrie lives saved from certain death. The assembly finally stopped debating and started listening. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, humanity began to prepare for war. The formal request for an audience came 3 days after the story of the Betty. May reached the Galactic Assembly. Ambassador Thuvex, the same crystalline being who had dismissed humanity as unremarkable 200 years ago, personally invited Admiral Lisa Dunn to meet with him on station. Kepler-9. Lisa was no longer the young captain who had stood nervously in the Great Hall during first contact. She was now 97 years old, kept alive and strong by medical technology that her species had developed in the centuries. Since joining galactic civilization, her hair was completely white now, and her face was lined with the marks of a long life. But her eyes still held the same steady fire that had burned in them. When she had promised to prove humanity's worth, she arrived at the station with a small escort. The halls that had once seemed overwhelming were now familiar. She had walked them many times over the years, negotiating trade agreements and resolving disputes. But this meeting felt different. The way other species looked at her as she passed, the whispers that followed in her wake, told her that something had changed. Thuvex met her in a private chamber overlooking the Great Hall. His crystalline form pulsed with colors that Lisa had learned to read over the years. Right now, those colors spoke of confusion and uncertainty. "Thank you for coming," Thuvex said. "I have questions that require answers." Lisa sat in the chair provided for her, a human design that the station had installed specifically for these meetings. "I expected you would. We have studied your species extensively since the incident at Valthor Prime," Thuvex began. "We have analyzed your history, your biology, your psychology. We have tried to understand how 3 of your people could do what they did. And what have you learned?" Thuvex's form flickered with frustration. "Nothing that makes sense. Your species has no natural weapons. Your claws are soft, your teeth are small, your skin tears easily. You cannot run faster than most predators on your own world. You cannot fly. You cannot breathe underwater for more than a few minutes. You cannot survive in extreme temperatures without artificial protection." "All true," Lisa agreed. "Your young are helpless for years. Years. Most species can walk within hours of birth. Your offspring cannot even lift their own heads for months. They require constant care and attention for over a decade before they can survive alone. This is an enormous evolutionary weakness." "Also true." Thuvex rose from his seat and began pacing, his crystalline feet chiming against the floor. "You require sleep for 1/3 of your lives. You must eat constantly, or you grow weak. You are vulnerable to thousands of diseases, parasites, and environmental toxins. Your lifespans are among the shortest of any spacefaring species." Lisa smiled slightly. "You seem frustrated." "I am confused." Thuvex stopped pacing and turned to face her. "By every biological metric, you should have been extinct long before achieving space travel. Your planet is filled with creatures that should have hunted you to extinction. Your environment has attempted to kill you repeatedly through ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, and disease outbreaks. Yet here you are, not only surviving, but thriving." "How?" Lisa stood and walked to the window overlooking the Great Hall below. Thousands of beings from hundreds of species moved through that space, going about their business. Most of them were physically superior to humans in one way or another. Yet the whispers she heard were about humanity. "I show you something?" she asked. She activated the holographic display built into the chamber's walls. Images began to appear, scenes from Earth's history. Not the moments of triumph and glory, but the disasters. The plagues that had killed millions, the wars that had devastated entire continents, the famines that had starved whole populations. She showed him the asteroid that had ended the age of dinosaurs, reshaping the planet and destroying most life on Earth. She showed him the volcanic winter that had reduced humanity to perhaps 10,000 individuals, bringing the species to the edge of extinction. She showed him the great wars that had killed tens of millions and left cities in ruins. Every one of these should have destroyed us, Lisa said quietly. Every one of these was a moment when our story should have ended. By your calculations, we should have died 1,000 times over. Yet you did not. No, we did not. Lisa turned to face Thuvex directly. And do you know why? Thuvex waited, his form still and attentive. Because we do not know how to give up. Lisa's voice grew stronger as she spoke. When the ice came, we learned to make fire and clothing. When the predators hunted us, we learned to make weapons and hunt them Add. When diseases killed us by the millions, we learned medicine. When we ran out of land, we built ships. When we ran out of world, we built rockets. She stepped closer to the ambassador, her eyes never leaving his glittering form. Your classification systems measure strength, speed, intelligence, psionic ability. You measure what species are. But you have no metric for what species will do when everything is taken from them, and what will humans do. Whatever it takes. Lisa's voice was soft now, but somehow more powerful for its softness. We will fight until our bodies break, and then we will keep fighting. We will sacrifice everything we have for people we have never met. We will face certain death and refuse to accept it. Not because we are strong, but because we do not know any other way to be. She returned to her seat, letting her words sink in. Thuvex stood motionless for a long moment, processing what she had said. The 3 humans on that cargo ship, he finally said, the one called Hector. He had no chance of survival. He knew this, yet he fought anyway. Yes. He killed 50 of the Keth before they overwhelmed him. 50 warriors bred for nothing but combat, each one physically superior to him in every measurable way. How is this possible? Lisa thought of Danny and Megan, still recovering in a hospital on Earth. She thought of Hector's family, who had received his body for burial, along with a medal that could never replace what they had lost. Because Hector was not fighting for himself, she said. He was fighting for those children on the ship. He was fighting for his friends. He was fighting for something bigger than his own life. And when humans fight for something they believe in, there is no force in the universe that can make them stop. Thuvex was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, quieter, perhaps even humbled. This is troubling data, he said. Lisa nodded slowly. It should be, because the Keth have done something very foolish. They have threatened our species. They have killed innocent people under our protection. They have pushed humanity to the edge. She stood and walked toward the door, pausing with her hand on the frame. And you are about to learn what happens when you push humanity to that edge. She left the ambassador standing alone in his chamber, staring at the holographic images of human history that still floated in the air around him, images of disaster and death and destruction and images. At the end of each catastrophe, of humans rising from the ashes and building again. For 200 years, humanity had been building in secret, hidden in asteroid fields too dense for sensors to penetrate, buried beneath the surfaces of dead moons, concealed in the dark spaces between stars. They had constructed something the galaxy had never seen before, not because they wanted war, but because they knew that peace sometimes required the strength to defend it. Admiral, Lisa Dunn stood on the bridge of the battleship Defiance, the flagship of a fleet that the Galactic Assembly did not know existed. Around her, 300 human warships emerged from their hiding places, their hulls dark and angular, designed to absorb sensor scans rather than reflect them. Each ship was crewed by volunteers who had trained their entire lives for this moment and who understood that they might not live to see its end. said Commander Kevin Park from his station at Tactical. He was a young man, only 35. But his eyes held the steady calm of someone who had made peace with what he was about to do. Fighter squadrons are launching now. Lisa watched the display as 3,000 fighters poured from the carrier ships. Forming up in formations so precise, they looked like single organisms moving through space. Each pilot had spent years in simulation, practicing maneuvers that pushed the limits of what human bodies could endure. Many of them had come from families with military traditions stretching back centuries on Earth. Medical ships are in position, reported Dr. Nina Castillo from the communications station. She was chief medical officer for the entire fleet, responsible for coordinating care across hundreds of vessels. She had served in disaster zones across human space and had seen what war did to bodies and minds. She hoped to save as many as she could. She knew she would not save them all. Lieutenant Rosa Mendez commanded the ground forces that would eventually be needed to liberate the occupied worlds. 10 divisions of Marines waited in their landing ships, now checking their weapons and saying quiet prayers to whatever gods they believed in. Rosa had fought in 3 different border conflicts and had the scars to prove it. But she had never faced anything like the Keth. The target was the Keth forward base in the Sigma Draconis system, a staging area for their invasion of civilized space. Intelligence suggested they had 6,000 warships there, along with ground forces numbering in the millions. It was the strongest concentration of Keth's military power in the region. Humanity was going to attack it with half as many ships. Admiral Kevin said quietly, "The Keth have detected us. They're forming up to intercept." Lisa studied the tactical display. The Keth fleet was massive, a wall of dark shapes bristling with weapons designed to tear through anything that opposed them. They had conquered a dozen species before the assembly was formed. They had never been defeated in open battle. "They're laughing at us," Lisa said. She could almost feel it, the contempt radiating from the alien fleet. They saw 300 human ships facing 6,000 of their own. They saw prey. Let them laugh. Lisa's voice was calm, but carried across the silent bridge. "All ships, engage on my mark." The human fleet accelerated toward the Keth formation. On paper, it was suicide. That Keth had twice the firepower, 3 times the armor. A numerical superiority that should have made the outcome certain. But human engineers had spent 2 centuries studying every piece of alien technology they could find. They had learned how Keth shields worked. They had analyzed their weapon systems. They had found the weaknesses that the Keth themselves had forgotten existed. Fire. The first salvo erupted from the human fleet, weapons that operated on principles the galaxy had never seen. Keth shields were designed to absorb and deflect energy. Human weapons did not use energy. They fired microscopic projectiles at velocities approaching the speed of light, too small to trigger shield reactions. Too fast to be intercepted by defensive systems, the first wave of projectiles passed through the Keth shields like they were not there. They struck holes and detonated inside, not outside, the enemy ships. Explosions rippled through the Keth. Formation as vessels that had never been damaged in combat suddenly found themselves dying. The Keth commander ordered a counterattack. His ship surged forward, plasma cannons blazing, kinetic weapons launching salvos that should have turned the human fleet into debris. But human ships were not where the Keth expected them to be. They moved faster than any vessel the Keth had faced before, darting through the gaps in enemy formations, striking from unexpected angles, refusing to stand and fight the way civilized species were supposed to fight. Kevin directed the battle with calm precision. Reading the flow of combat like a musician reading music, he saw patterns where others saw chaos. He found opportunities where others saw only danger. When a Keth dreadnought tried to flank the human formation, he directed 3 cruisers to intercept it. When a wave of Keth fighters threatened the medical ships, he called in a squadron that had been waiting in reserve. Dr. Nina Castillo worked without rest as the wounded began arriving on the hospital ships. Human casualties were mounting. Burned bodies, radiation injuries, trauma wounds that would have been fatal a century ago. She saved everyone she could and grieved for those she could not. But she kept working, because that was what humans did. Rosa Mendez and her Marines waited in their landing craft. Listening to the battle over their communicators, they knew their turn would come. The Keth ground forces would not surrender easily. There would be fighting on a dozen worlds before this war was over. Rosa checked her weapon for the 100th time and made herself breathe slowly. The battle lasted 19 hours. 19 hours of constant combat, of ships dying in flashes of light, of pilots pushing their bodies beyond the limits of endurance. 19 hours of humanity, proving that everything the galaxy believed about them was wrong. When it was over, the Keth fleet was broken. 6,000 ships reduced to wreckage that would drift through this system for thousands of years. Their commander was dead, killed when the human cruiser Victory rammed his flagship at full speed. A deliberate sacrifice that took 500 human lives, but ended the battle hours earlier than it would have otherwise. The human fleet had lost 47 ships, nearly 20,000 lives. Fathers and mothers, sons and daughters, friends and lovers, every one of them had known the risks. Every one of them had chosen to come anyway. Lisa stood on the bridge of the Defiance and looked at the field of debris that had once been an invincible armada. She felt no joy, only a heavy weight in her chest that she knew would never fully go away. "Begin rescue operations," she ordered, "and start recording names. I want every person we lost remembered. Every single one." Kevin nodded and began issuing orders. Throughout the fleet, the Arceus shifted from destruction to salvation. Human ships moved through the wreckage, searching for survivors among both their own vessels and, surprisingly, among the Keth, because that was also what humans did. Word of the victory spread across the galaxy within hours. The Keth, the unstoppable conquerors, had been defeated by a species that the Assembly had classified as unremarkable. Suddenly everyone wanted to know more about these humans. Suddenly everyone wanted to be their ally, but Lisa knew this was only the beginning. The Keth had more fleets, more warriors, more worlds to draw resources from. This victory had proven that humans could fight them. Winning the war would require much more. The war lasted 3 more years. 3 years of battles across 100 star systems. 3 years of victories and defeats, of planets liberated and fleets destroyed, of heroes rising and falling like stars burning bright before fading into darkness. Humanity did not fight alone. After the Battle of Sigma Draconis, allies emerged from every corner of the galaxy. The Vetheri, those gentle creatures with blue fur and trusting eyes, contributed everything they had. Their factories produced supplies. Their scientists shared medical knowledge. Their people volunteered for dangerous missions behind enemy lines. They had been saved by 3 humans on a cargo ship, and they would never forget that debt. The Morith, ancient beings of living shadow, provided knowledge that had been hidden for millions of years. They shared the locations of Keth's weak points. They revealed the secrets of Keth's communication, allowing human forces to intercept enemy plans. Old Kelvoth himself appeared on the bridge of the Defiance one day, offering his services as an advisor. "I told you," he whispered to Admiral Lisa Dunn, "not to judge the river by the stillness of its surface. I am pleased to see I was right." Even the Volari joined the fight eventually. Ambassador Thuvex personally led a crystalline battle squadron into combat, its ancient ships standing alongside human vessels against the Keth onslaught. When asked why, he said only that he had learned something from humanity, something about refusing to give up. But it was humans who bore the heaviest burden. Human ships formed the core of every major fleet. Human marines stormed the beaches of occupied worlds. Human pilots flew into battles they knew they might not survive. And human commanders made the terrible decisions that war demanded, sacrificing some to save many. Choosing between impossible options, Lisa Dunn grew older during those 3 years. The weight of command pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force. Every report of casualties felt like a knife in her heart. Every memorial service left her more exhausted than the last. But she kept going, because her people needed her to keep going. Because giving up was not something humans knew how to do. The final battle came at the Keth homeworld, a dark planet orbiting a dying star. The Keth had retreated there after losing control of their conquered territories. They had gathered every remaining ship, every warrior, every weapon they had left. It was their last stand. The Allied fleet was the largest ever assembled in galactic history. Ships from 30 different species formed up alongside the human armada. But everyone knew who would lead the assault. Everyone knew who would take the greatest risk. "Are you sure about this?" Kevin Park asked Lisa as they prepared for the final jump. He had been promoted to captain after his performance at Sigma Draconis, commanding his own cruiser now. But he still reported to Lisa before every major battle. She had become something more than a commanding officer to him. She had become a symbol of what humanity could be. Lisa looked at the tactical display showing the enemy positions. The Keth had fortified their world with everything they had. Breaking through would cost lives. Many lives. "We have to end this," she said. "Not just for us. For every species the Keth have threatened. For every world they've destroyed. For every innocent person who died because we weren't strong enough to stop them sooner." The attack began at dawn, local time on the Keth homeworld. Human ships punched through the orbital defenses while Allied forces provided support. Rosa Mendez and her Marines landed on the surface, fighting through streets filled with Keth warriors who knew they had nothing left to lose. The combat was brutal. For every position gained, blood was paid. Human soldiers fell beside Valkyrie medics and Moroth scouts. Crystalline Valari shattered defending their comrades. The Alliance held together through sheer determination, each species giving everything for the others. It took a week to reach the Keth capital. A week of constant fighting, of exhaustion so deep that soldiers moved like sleepwalkers. Of wounds that would have stopped anyone who was not driven by something beyond mere survival. But finally, the guns fell silent. Finally, the last Keth defensive line broke. Lisa Dunn walked into the throne room of the Keth. Queen with an honor guard of humans and allies behind her, the Queen was an ancient creature, larger than any Keth they had seen before. Her exoskeleton scarred by millennia of survival and conquest, she sat on a throne made from the bones of species she had destroyed, surrounded by the last of her royal guards. "You have one," the Queen said. Her voice was like grinding stone. "Why have you not destroyed us?" Lisa stopped a few meters from the throne. She was tired beyond words. Her uniform was stained with dirt and blood that was not all her own. She had lost count of the friends she had buried during this war. "Because we could," she said simply. The Queen's compound eyes flickered with confusion. "You could destroy us. Your weapons are in orbit. Your soldiers surround my city. You have the power to end my species forever. After everything we have done, you would be justified." "Probably." Lisa nodded slowly. "By most measures of justice, extinction would be an appropriate response to your crimes. Billions of innocent lives. Dozens of species extinguished. Entire civilizations erased from existence. Now then, why do you hesitate?" Lisa was silent for a long moment. She thought of Danny Reeves, now retired on a quiet world where the skies never darkened with war. She thought of Hector Salinas, whose name was inscribed on a memorial wall that stretched for miles. She thought of the 20,000 humans who had died at Sigma Draconis, and the many more who had fallen since. "Because mercy is not weakness," she finally said. "Because choosing not to destroy when you have the power to do so is the truest form of strength." She stepped closer to the Queen, meeting those alien eyes without fear. "And because we hope that you can be better, that anyone can be better. That's what humans do. Against all evidence, against all probability, we hope." The Queen studied her for a long time. Then, slowly, she lowered her head. The Keth surrendered. The war was over in the months that followed. The Galactic Assembly debated humanity's new classification. They argued for weeks, unable to find a category that fit. Humans were not the strongest, or the fastest, or the smartest. They did not have the longest lifespans or the most advanced natural abilities. By every objective measure, they remained unremarkable. But Thuvex, who had watched humanity change from dismissed newcomers to galactic saviors, proposed something new. A classification that had never existed before. Category Prime, he announced to the assembled representatives of 1,000 species. a designation for a species whose potential cannot be measured by current metrics, a species that defies probability and logic, a species that, when everything shifts against them, shifts everything back. The vote was unanimous. Lisa Dunn lived to see the ceremony where humanity officially received its new classification. She was 103 years old, white-haired and weathered, but still standing straight. Around her stood the survivors of the war, humans and allies who had fought together and would never forget what they had shared, and across the galaxy. In every system and on every world, species that had once dismissed humanity as merely people finally understood the truth. Humans were never just people. They were survivors who refused to die. They were fighters who refused to surrender. They were dreamers who refused to let the universe tell them what was possible. They were humanity, and everything had shifted.